Good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon.
I am super excited to have Miss Icia Ragsdale, a social worker who actually provides therapy to families with infertility. And she's got a special story about her own connection to this space. So I'm super excited to have you, Miss Ragsdale. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi, I'm excited to be here today.
Awesome, awesome. So today we're going to be talking about a very important topic on Coffee with Cade. We're going to be talking about how to have the talk. So there are a lot of the talks, depending on kind of your situation. But the talk that we're talking about today is how do you tell your miracle or your rainbow or whatever you call your child that came
Mm.
after infertility? How do you tell them about how they were conceived? I know that as you all probably know, I have triplets, and we had a lot of conversations with our kids. The conversation started when they were about 3 years old, but we want to hear from the experts. So Miss Ragsdale is going to please, please, please share with us about what to do, what to say, when to say it, how to say it. And then you guys who are joining us on Facebook and Instagram, tell us your story. Have you had the talk yet? And when do you plan to have the talk? We want to engage with you. Before we move on, I want to do a quick plug. Our family building grant is due February the 10th. The deadline was
Yay.
extended. Yay! It was supposed to be February 1st. Now it's February 10th. So you have another week to get your applications in. So if you are thinking about whether or not to apply for the family building grant, please know that the resource is here, but you got to apply if you want to be awarded. And for more information, visit us online at www.cadefoundation.com/grants. Now, Mrs. Ragsdale,
Yes,
please
ma'am.
share all about what we ought to do or share your story. Tell me about why you care about this cause.
So, infertility is very, very, very near and dear to my heart. All my life, I just grew up knowing that I was going to get married, have kids, follow the normal or what we deem to be like the normal protocol of life. And I got married and we had no babies. And I mean, we tried for many years. We went through Shady Grove. We did a lot of different infertility treatments, and nothing was working. And it was nothing worse than having to keep looking at people who were saying, well, when are you going to have a baby? When are you going to have a baby? When are you going to have kids? Blah, 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 blah. So, we went through that journey. And we were on that journey for quite a while. And it wasn't until 10 years later, after trying a million different things, that, we got our miracle baby. On that journey, though, we ended up adopting who was then my goddaughter. Wardrobe malfunction. I'm just gonna leave it at all. Uh, we ended up adopting my goddaughter when she was 4 years old, and she's now 17. So I
Oh,
feel like I
wow.
have, yeah. So we've had her since she was four, but so I feel like I'm on both sides of the spectrum as far as dealing with the whole infertility piece, having the adoption piece, having the conversation. Having an internal dialogue, all of those things. And so I really, really try to work with women from that space, that therapeutic space, also with that intimate personal space, and helping them to mend and grow and heal and confront the hard things from that perspective.
So can we break down that back a little bit? Can we
Yes,
construct
because I
that
know
a
I gave
little
you a
bit?
lot.
Because wow, there's a lot packed in there. So you struggled with infertility,
Yes,
and then you and your husband ended up having fertility treatment
we
and
did.
had a child. I'm assuming that the child is living right now.
So my 3-year-old boy is definitely living, but he did not come from the fertility treatments.
Okay.
He was literally my miracle baby.
Okay. So you had fertility treatment. It was not successful.
No.
And then you adopted, and it was
Yes.
a known adoption. You actually were already connected to the child.
Yes.
Then was it conducted through the foster care system?
No, it wasn't. So interesting story. She was my goddaughter, and we were always in her life. And her mom kind of brought her over to our house at 4, and just not kind of never came back. So it was like a real. We went through the process of doing guardianship first and custody, and then it was adoption, because I was hoping throughout that process that I didn't know what mom was going to do. We didn't know that it was going to end up in adoption. We didn't know it was going to end up being permanent, but that was her journey with us, and it ended up working out that way, and it's a blessing. And it's so funny because if you talk to her today, she'll tell you, I'm so confused that I'm adopted because I look so much like my dad and act so much like my mom. She's like, I have to internally remind myself, like, I'm adopted. You know what I mean? Like, God really blended it and meshed it, and you really can't tell. Like, unless we tell you, like, you cannot tell that she's adopted. So
Well, she was supposed to be in your home,
she
but
was supposed to be there.
so that brings up another conversation, because we're talking about the talk, and you've had to have several, I guess, kinds of talks within
Mm-hmm.
your family. I guess your background probably makes that a little bit easier, but
Mm-hmm.
when you have the talk, and it involves adoption, but adoption from kind of a known situation where you're already connected, when do you start having those conversations? Because it sounds like that happened when she was really young,
Mm-hmm.
even at an age where she might have remembered, but she may have not even remembered. I don't remember a lot from when I was 4 years old, but that doesn't.
Believe it or not, you probably remember a lot more than what you think that you do. Um, and what I will tell you is that with my daughter, we've had to have the talk multiple times because the talk looks different at different stages of life. Because the way that talk looks at 4 is very different than how it looks in upper elementary school, and it looks very different in middle school. It looks very different in high school. It looks very different. Right now, my baby's in the 11th grade. She's getting ready to become a senior next year. And so the talk is still the talk. And so I'm not really, I think this conversation is so interesting because you have to know your kid and you have to be open and give your child space to evolve in the talk, because the answer that they get at 4 is not always going to be the sufficient answer at 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, because as they continue to
I think we lost you.
evolve and develop.
I'm sorry.
Say that again.
That last thought, we kind of you kind of went out. So what you were saying was
Sorry.
the talk has to change.
The talk has to change and it has to evolve, because as people we evolve,
Yeah.
and so answers that we may have had that were sufficient at one point in time in life are no longer going to be sufficient. And what's most important that goes along with the talk is not just having the conversation, but it's also the conversation that you have with other people around you. Because when your children have conversations with other people, sometimes they can plant seeds, or they can plant doubt, or they can put their own perspective or their own opinion. And sometimes those things can kind of undo
The work that you've done at
the
home.
work that you've done. And so we've dealt with that, also too. And we've had to sever our relationships with some people in family who continue to insist on treating her one way and treating our son another way, because we're not okay with that. We are a unit. We are a family. We are a unit, and you take us or you take none. So
Yes, yes, yes. Guys, send in your questions. This is great. This is fantastic information. So what I am hearing, so this conversation, for those of you who are just joining us for lunch, is how to have the talk with your child who may have been conceived with donor eggs, donor sperm, gestational carrier perhaps, or even your child who was adopted. And what I am hearing from Ms. Ragsdale are fantastic, a mental health provider who actually supports families going through this. It's not a talk. It is either the talks or talking.
It's like an evolving talk.
Evolving conversation that we continue to have. Yes, over time.
Yes, definitely. Definitely, because I would definitely have to say, at 4, and at 5, as things were kind of happening and evolving, it was okay to say to her, well, mom had to make some different kind of choices and chances or whatever. And depending on if you are faith-based or if you have religion or any type of higher power belief, we were able to say, but God chose this for you. God allowed this to happen. God made sure that you're okay. God showed his love to you like this. Like you can frame it in many different ways, knowing your child, knowing what you believe, knowing your family background. All of those things have to kind of come into the conversation. And a lot of times, at 4, 5, and 6, children are very easy to just give them something and they'll just kind of take you at your word.
Yes,
You
they
know, they're not very challenging at that age. As they continue to hit like 10, 12, 13, 14, the same way they begin to question Santa Claus, like, well, how does Santa Claus come through the chimney? How does this begin to happen?
yeah,
Then a lot of times some children may deal with, well, what was it about me? Why was I not good enough? What did I do that was wrong? Why this? Why that? So then you get that why factor that comes into place.
yes,
And so that's why I said the conversation, you have to navigate it, you have to change it. But the first part, before you can ever have a conversation with anybody else, is you have to first have the conversation with yourself. And you have to be comfortable with yourself in whatever it is whatever the message is that you want to communicate to your child, because children are people. And I am a big proponent that you have to be honest with your children, because children, people say that children are resilient, and they are resilient, but they're resilient when they are surrounded with love and when they are surrounded with security and knowing that, okay, this bad situation happened, but if mom and dad says that it's going to be okay, I can trust that it's going to be okay. But if you have a history of being dishonest with your children, or if you have a history where your word does not carry much weight with them, then when you try to engage in harder conversations, it can be met with resistance, it can be met with betrayal, it can be met with mistrust in what you're saying. So before you ever have any conversation, you want to always make sure that it's laden on a foundation of love and respect and mutual trust between yourself and your child first, no matter what the age is, before you engage into such a life altering conversation.
so
Make sure that that foundation is there.
so I got two follow-ups for that, because we think often adults may tell kids what they would consider little white lies just for
Mm-hmm.
convenience. We're out of cookies when I don't want you to have another cookie, or
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, just things people may say to get the kid to stop asking the question. But what you're saying is those little white lies, because kids will find out, no, we actually have one.
They do.
Um, they really undercut
Mm-hmm.
your child's ability to trust you. Is that?
And it also undercuts your child ability to be able to cope with things later on in life.
Mm,
It's really my 3-year-old, it's much easier for me to say to him, yeah, we just don't have any cookies, versus me saying, I do have cookies, but you're not getting any more today.
yes,
His reaction to both of those conversations are very, very challenging and very different.
and different.
If he knows that we have them and I'm just telling him no, his response is always way more personal. Like, you're taking this away from me. Like, you can just
Yeah,
see it in his response and in his fallout. And I'm okay with that, because I'm like, at some point in time in life as an adult, you have to recognize
that's
that
right.
you're going to be told no, you're going to be denied certain things, and you have to learn now how to be able to deal with and process those things. And I think sometimes that in our efforts to make life easier for us, to make life comfortable for us, we end up doing our children a greater disservice as they evolve into who they're becoming as they become adults. We
Because
don't give them the ability. Yeah, it's like we stifle their ability to become, and we don't really allow ourselves to support them as they're growing and learning and building these blocks, right? Kids are kind of like this, like they're kind of like little blocks, like, and we just kind of gotta just keep building, like one layer on top of
yeah,
the other on top of the other. But when we take away their ability to grow and to learn, we undercut them as they become adults. When they
yes, yes.
like that or whatever, and it's because they were undercut somewhere in their adolescent foundation.
Well, that's really very, very important. I got a follow-up question to that. When do you start having the talk? So you mentioned, the 4-year-old conversation with
Mm-hmm.
your daughter. I know we started talking with our kids when they were probably about, I don't know, 2.5 or 3. As soon as they
Mm-hmm.
could kind of understand, when do we start the talk? What age is an appropriate age to have the beginning talk? And then I've got a question from Michael Scott Rupert. My twins turn 4 soon, and should we introduce the topic about separate people donating for mom's gestation, or should we talk the science and petri dish of cells becoming babies and then plug in the donor factor later? So if you could answer, let's start with his question, and then
Okay, you want to start with his first?
yeah,
Okay.
let's start with his, and then when do you say the ideal time is to start having a conversation?
So I think his question, and I can only see half of it on my screen, but I think his question is an evolving question.
Okay.
I don't think at 4 they'll understand the petri dish and the this and the that. You know what I mean? I do think that they may understand that maybe their family has had help with creating them. They had help with building them. They were outsiders and they know their children. So people are still people, right?
Yes.
And the way I would say something to someone with an A personality is not the way I would say something to someone with a B personality.
Understood.
So, in knowing the personality and knowing the cultural background, religious background, and knowing the temperament, I always say start the conversation as early as possible because you want to keep it as a wide open conversation, but
Yes.
keep it very age appropriate. Keep it fun love, not fun me, but like fun loving and lighthearted.
Mm.
You don't want to make it like a too hard or too complex or something that they don't understand or something that would make them feel as if they're not a person or that they're not whole. But as they continue to grow and evolve and get older, and you'll know maybe once they hit middle school and they start having those more complex scientific classes, if they're interested in having the conversation, you might want to go to a little bit more of the nuances at that point. But for now at 4, I would just keep it really basic. Like, we're so grateful to have you guys. We had a little bit of help. As you guys get older, we'll talk about it, and kind of see what direction the kids want to go in with that.
Mhm.
Sometimes when you lead, they'll want to know more and then they'll let you know like what their mental capacity is for being able to hold the information. And then sometimes they'll back off and you'll know they're not quite ready, just kind of like with the sex talk. When your kid is ready to have
Uh,
that conversation. When they're ready to engage. When they're kind of like, oh my god, like you're freaking me out, like stop. So you kind of got to feel your kid out and just let them know that when you're ready, this door is wide open and we're not afraid to walk through it with you.
and so, one thing, another question, kind of, you dealt with the sex talk because that was another talk that has evolved. At least in my home, we've had different iterations of that. And I know originally it started off. My husband and I thought, okay, we're going to just put it all out there, and our kids kind of sat, mouths open, like we didn't really want that. We just needed some basic information. So,
Mhm.
I like what you're saying about making things age appropriate,
Yes.
but also not assuming that the kids may have more concern or more
Mhm.
different feelings. Your anxiety may not actually reflect their anxiety. It may just be yours. They may not have any negative feelings.
Oftentimes it's our anxiety.
Yeah.
And the one thing that I realize is that when we project our anxiety on our kids, like it overwhelms them. So
Mhm.
we have to be very careful not to, whether if it's with grades, whether if it's with sex, whether if it's with whatever, because we have to also remember that our kids live in the information age. And so being in the information age, there's a lot of information that they have right there at their fingertips.
Yes.
So my biggest thing when I talk to my kids and when I work with my families is you want your kids to know that you are not afraid to have any conversation with them that they need to have. But not only are you not afraid to have the conversation with them, you also want them to know that the door is open for them to come and talk to you
Yeah.
and for them to not be afraid and that you're not afraid to go there with them when they're having certain conversations or
Mhm.
when they have certain questions about different things.
And
So
so kind of getting back to the age, you said as soon as possible. Does that mean 2? Does that mean 3, 4? Does that mean
I
I
think more like 3, 4. I think at 2, comprehension and understanding is not necessarily, and I'm judging off of like the children that I've worked with and even off of my son, but
got
I see something really leaped in him at 3. There's a different level of comprehension. There's a different level of awareness of what's going on in the world at 3. So we've started having the conversation with him, like, like your sister's adopted. This is
mm,
still your sister. Like, there's no difference. Like, we love her just like we love you. Everything is always going to be the same, but this is your sister and this is how she became part of the family. And I see the wheels turning in his mind a little bit, but I also know that he does not fully understand that. But we'll keep, we'll keep working with him,
you keep having that the evolving conversation.
evolving and not daily because
Yeah.
I'm not going to beat it because I don't want that to be the most pressing conversation, right? Because that's not the most important thing. But
Yes.
I do want him to be aware, and I would never want him to hear it from somebody else outside of the family, and him either not knowing how to respond or not knowing what that means or getting misinformation first.
So let's kind of talk about that because that is something that happens. You know, everybody
Yes.
kind of has a that cousin or that uncle or that family friend or that whoever
Hmm.
that feels like it's their, you know, it's their job to make sure
Yep.
that child knows. And
And they're not always nice about how they make them aware. Their word choice is not always appropriate. And you're absolutely right. So that was one of our things. We wanted to get out in front of
yes.
any busybody that wanted to try to create a disruption or try to create a problem or anything else like that.
Mm-hmm.
And we have had that.
And to have a give a different narrative sometimes than you want
Yes.
the child to have. So I guess there's another talk sometimes that has to take place with family and friends and people who were around when everything
Hmm.
was happening. How do you talk with them, or do you talk with them to make sure that they understand, you know, that you want to be the one that actually speak with the kids, or that you don't want them, you know, I don't, well, let me not put words in your mouth, but how do you deal with family and friends who kind of watched you go through it? And so
Hmm.
they remember, and they may remember how they remember, and they may not remember differently than you do, but
Hmm.
because they were there, they feel like they kind of have the right to share
And
with.
you know what's funny about what you're asking? What's funny about what you're asking is that now in the age of social media,
Yeah,
even people you don't think about,
you're right.
right? Who
Absolutely.
are kind of like now in our world and in our life and different things
Absolutely.
like that, they're there. And so, you can't always control other people. I would have to say that for me, the people who mattered, who were gonna be in our life, who were core essential people that were a part of what I would consider family community, we had the conversation with them. And that conversation was very easy because even when we introduced the conversation to them, they were just like, there's no conversation that's needed. Like, this is our family. Like, this is, we were in this journey with you. We were on this process with you.
Yeah.
But you can't always control the narrative when kids go to school and they share, oh, I've been adopted, or when they share this or when they share that. And then kids come from their backgrounds and their perspectives of what their families have heard and what they've said and what they've seen on the internet and on TV and through different TV shows, whether it be rude, kind, or indifferent. You can't always control that, just like with anything else, like bullying. But that's why you have to make sure that you are controlling the internal narrative with you and your child as much as possible.
So, how do we deal with follow up questions? For instance, if a child says, "Well, I want to meet this person." I mean, we live in an age where literally, if you had an egg donor or a sperm donor,
Hmm.
you know, with a little spit, within 6 to 8 weeks, you could actually be reconnected with that person
Yeah.
because that is possible where it wasn't even an option years ago. So if your child says, "Well, I want to meet that person or I want to be
Hmm.
connected with them," you know, how do you talk about that?
It's funny you say that because in the age of social media, once again, it's so easy to Instagram, Facebook, whatever. Like everything is at the fingertips. And just to kind of bring it all together, my daughter is in a space now where she's like, should I reconnect with my family? And the thing that I challenged her with, because if she started this conversation at 16, I said, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I'm going to give you several things to think about. Why do you want to reconnect? What are the outcomes you want to reconnect?
Yeah.
And what are the possible consequences if reconnection does not go the way you think it's going to go? And once you have come to those, once you have arrived at those conclusions on your own, I will support whatever decision you come up with. But you have to know within yourself why you want to do it, what outcome are you looking for? And what are the emotional and internal consequences that are going to happen if things don't go the way that you want them to go? So I'm a big proponent as a parent to really not try to tell your kids what to do because some children, when you say no, they're going to say yes. When you say
Yes.
east, they're going to say west.
Uh,
And so to kind of like avoid all of that, I really try to challenge her thinking and make her know if you're doing this, I want you to do this for you. And I want you to walk into this decision with your eyes wide open, knowing that these are the risks that can happen, but these are also the blessings that can happen. And when you think about it and when you weigh it out, if the blessings outweigh the risk, you know what, girl, let's put on these combat boots and let's go for it. But
Yeah.
if you're not sure if that risk of finding out or walking down a rabbit hole that you're not sure what's there, like if it does not mean that much to you, hold off and think about it until a later time.
I
So
got
it's always about motive and motivation and challenging your children to think and challenging them to make decisions that are best for them, especially when other people have been making so many decisions for them. Like if you were adopted, someone else made that decision for you. If you were created, someone else made that decision for you. This is an opportunity for you to own your life and make your own decision, make a quality decision, and let's think about and walk through all the stages of making a thought or making a decision. And when you arrive at it, I will support you either direction you go.
Well, I love what you're saying because I think that often kids and even adults think, well, because I've made this decision, the out, the what I'm looking for is going to be positive. There's going to be kind
Mm-hmm.
of like a rainbow at the end of this road that I've never been down. But sometimes there's a, it's not rainbows. It's
Mm-hmm.
bad things. You may learn things that you weren't prepared for. So
Mm-hmm.
are there any resources that you would recommend for people who do have young children or even, teens or middle schoolers who are thinking about these conversations, these evolving conversations,
Mm-hmm.
books or websites or
So I'm glad you asked.
yeah.
I am hopefully by the fall I'm releasing my it'll end up being my third children's book by the fall. I have one coming out hopefully in April. The first one will drop in April, but it's called Grafted in Purpose. And this children's book, I know grafted is a big word for a children's book, but Grafted in Purpose is a story of four different branches who got separated from their original tree family, and they're getting grafted into this tree called Purpose. And each one of them had their own story, their own backgrounds, their own narratives. And I wrote it specifically in honor of my daughter and some of my cousins, because we actually had three cousins who were adopted into my family,
Beautiful.
to just kind of help open up the door for conversation and to help parents kind of navigate their way through. How to have the conversation, possible feelings that could be elicited within the children as they think about their story, as they think about how they came to their new family, as they think about those things. So please be watching because I'm definitely going to be shouting it to the moon-top
Well,
once it comes out. But
yes, when it comes out, please share a copy with us. We will put it on social media
absolutely,
and we will let everybody know about it. So Grafted in Purpose coming this fall.
this fall, Grafted in
And
Purpose.
I look forward to seeing that. And I know that it's going to be fantastic. So we could probably continue this conversation all morning and
All morning,
yes,
yes.
and into the afternoon and evening. But Coffee with Cade is only 30 minutes. So
Okay.
we will see you all next Monday. Before we go, I want to remind everyone we do have a family building grant, which would provide up to $10,000 for fertility treatment or domestic adoption. And you can learn more about that at cadefoundation.org/grants. And we have several specific grants that are only for people from certain areas. And then we also have a general family building grant. And we have given out almost $1 million,
Wow.
$960,000 worth of support and 121 grants so far. So if you have a financial need, check out our website, cadefoundation.org/grants for more information. Thank you once again. We have Miss Icia Ragsdale, who is a social worker who provides counseling services in the Baltimore metropolitan area, both family counseling and more specifically counseling for families that have had infertility. And so I thank you for your time. And if
Thank you for having me.
yes, absolutely. And I want to talk again because I think we've got a lot and we need to continue this. We got a question that came on. Words have meanings such as parent. Do you recommend using terms such as biological parent or biological donor? Thanks for your time. So how do we phrase it? And that'll be our parting question.
Okay, so I think that with anything, because words do have meaning, I
Yeah.
think that whatever you choose, whatever you feel most comfortable with, define what that means. Whatever it is, put the definition to it so that way they know what it is that you're talking about. So if you want to say biological donor, then you can just let them know this is because the science of it all, or whatever, or you can say loving parent, you can say whatever, but whatever terminology works best, right? Because certain terminology in my house, my kids are going to be like, what are you talking about? You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like there's no one cookie cutter way. Just make sure you guys are having the same conversation that is well defined,
That's good.
and that not only is it well defined, that when you're communicating, they know exactly what you mean and what you're saying, and that at all times they know that it's rooted in love. That is the biggest thing. Children will produce whatever the root is. And if the root is love, no matter how many transitions and no matter how twisted the roots can be, at the end, the fruit will be love, even
Mm,
if you don't see it for a while.
I
Just
think
keep watering that fruit.
I think that's the word for the day. The fruit will be love.
The fruit will be love.
That's wonderful. Well, this is Coffee with Cade. And so thank you guys for spending your lunch time with us. What
Yes.
are you drinking? What's in your cup? I see it's from IHOP, so I hope you had some crepes or some pancakes this morning.
I had my, what is it? Those the eggs, when the hard boiled eggs and some
Okay.
pieces of bacon and some water, because I'm trying to lose weight. I'm trying to get my J Lo body. I
Oh,
saw J Lo last
okay.
night.
I saw Jay. Go, go. And then I, in honor of one of my favorite shows, and also this is a mug that my sister-in-law got me. Uh, I am the real mother of dragons. I've got three.
Oh,
Yes, so usually I have my cake mug, but today, because of this conversation, I brought my Game of Thrones, Mother of Dragons
I
mug,
love it.
my usual black tea with cream, and it was delicious.
Oh,
All right,
sounds good.
you
Thank you
hold the
so
line
much for having
on
me.
social media. Thank you, everyone. This will be posted and available offline afterwards, and it'll also be available at the Cade Foundation website, cadefoundation.org. See you next week when we're going to have a fantastic conversation about love, football, and 2 weeks. Love, football, and infertility. How do all of
Oh,
those things fit together?
wow. That's awesome. Thank you so much again.